Thank you for joining us for week 5 of Through the Wilderness. The first week we looked at how Moses' sin and choices led him out into the desert. So his hard place was created by the choices he made. The second week we talked about how Israel crossed the Red Sea to enter into the Promised Land. And this was a wilderness of promise. To get to where God was taking them, they had to go through this tough spot, which led to week 3. If God was calling them and taking them, he would provide for them, both naturally and supernaturally. And they began to grumble and complain, which leads to week 4. God said, I'm going to go before you. He showed them these miracles, not just in Egypt, but both on the journey. And he was going to establish covenant with them and give the law. And while they awaited God, they made a golden calf to worship, so an idol, so another God would lead them. It is hard to be faithful in the desert, but it's important. And so this week we're going to be talking about what do we do when we know God has called us somewhere. We know we're on the path, we know we're going, and it's still hard. But we've seen God provide. Every time we get up, we may get knocked down again, but we don't have to stay there. And so what we saw last week was in Sinai, the mountain, and in that wilderness. They leave that wilderness to a land called Paran. Now, Paran is where we see Ishmael and Hagar's story. So they're not far. It literally means outskirts, the wilderness. So they're just on the outskirts of the Promised Land. They're almost there. But now it was time to not just wait and passively listen to God, but to actively listen. And that can be one of the hardest things. If we've been in a tough spot for a long time, it can be hard to actually move forward when it comes the opportunity. When we finally have that moment to leave where we've been and to go to the place of promise, that can be just as difficult. That can be just as hard. And we may pray, we may be expectant, so maybe we prayed for God to deliver us from our Egypt, our sin, our past, our bondage. Maybe we've been praying for God to lead and guide us on this journey. Maybe we've been praying to God to just change us and change everything. And God finally provides the way. So what does Israel do? He sends them to this land, and the people complain 3 days after Sinai, 3 days after the covenant. And not just the people, but Moses' own siblings, Aaron and Miriam. They oppose Moses. And so now they're on the outskirts, and everybody's like, we don't know if we can make it. Well, let's read in Numbers chapter 13 what happens. So the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a chief among them. So Moses sent them from the wilderness to Paran, according to the command of the Lord, all of them, men who were heads of the people of Israel. I'm going to skip down to verse 16. And these were the names of the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land. And Moses called Hoshea, the son of Nun, Joshua. So God says, we're going to go in, and Moses is like, all right, everybody, if you're so worried, let's go take a look of what's actually in there. This wasn't doubt, but this was prudence, right? If God's going to call us, we can do our due diligence. There's nothing wrong with that, right? If we go into a season of preparation, there's nothing wrong. But something stands out to me about this verse. We have all the heads of the tribes that are listed. And if you want to see that verse, I'll have it in the notes of the names. But just for time's sake, I'm kind of speeding through some of these stories. But then Moses chooses a man, Joshua, the son of Nun. Joshua was faithful. Going back to some of our other stories, Joshua is kind of the first time we see his name mentioned here. But we see this lineage of a man who said, I will trust God. I will follow Moses. I will make it to the Promised Land. And actually, he would eventually be the one to lead Israel, not Moses, into this land of promise. So here's what he tells them in verse 17. Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, and he said to them, go up into the Negeb and go into the hill country and see what the land is, whether the people who dwell in are strong or weak, few or many, or whether the land that they dwell in is good or bad, whether the cities that dwell in are camps or strongholds, whether the land is rich or poor, whether there are trees in it or not. but be of good courage and bring some of the fruit of the land. Now the time was in season of the first ripe grapes. He says, go in and see what's going on. Let's see what's in there. This was going to be an encouragement. The land is going to be exactly what God said it was. And that is where Moses has his faith. Go in and see the place God has promised and bring back the crops. Why does that matter? He knew the people needed a wind. They needed something tangible to hold on to, even though they've had miracle after miracle after miracle. If they were going to go into this place, he was going to give them some sign that it was going to be worthwhile. And so the spies go into what's called the wilderness of Zin. Not sin like an earlier week, of Zin. And this is exactly what God promised. There was grapes and pomegranates and figs, and importantly, water, right? It was a beautiful place, but it wasn't alone. It was fortified. There were cities, and these people had been there for a while. The people of Israel had been in captivity for hundreds of years. So the spies see these folks. They're bigger, stronger. They had cities. They would have had better weapons. They would have had better food. And folks, there's moments when God calls us out. We have to fight for our future. God is calling us out of our wilderness. And I mean this in a spiritual sense, of course, not like literal warfare. But even though God has won us the victory, made the promise, we still have to go obtain that promise. Israel would have to now trust God, not to just deliver them from this wilderness, but that he would prosper them, even in conflict of these new people. The spies are there for 40 days, and they come back together. And Moses says, give your report. And only Caleb and Joshua said, we can take them. They said, this is the land flowing milk and honey. But there's people there, and they're strong, and they're giants. He calls them the Nephilim, the sons of Anak. That's another video for another time. So not only do they have to combat wilderness, they have to combat enemies and other groups. It lists these other groups, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hittites. There was more conflict ahead of them. And I think we get this idea that's like, okay, God, one of the reasons I know I'm following you and I'm doing what's right is because everything's falling in line. That can be true. But that doesn't necessarily mean it falls in line without us striving to move forward. This is the entire idea of faith and faithfulness. It's one thing to say I trust God. It is a whole nother thing to actively live that out. And what they saw is all of this reason not to go forward. Only Caleb and Joshua said we can take him. The rest are said no way. So there's moments where we're going to look at what's ahead and say, God, I can't do what you're asking me to do. This is too much. Can't you see what's ahead? Which is why we have to walk with God. Absolutely. On their own strength, this was not going to work. Keep in mind, these other groups have been fighting with each other. They're trained for war. The Israelites have been in captivity. They've been wandering. They don't have as good of weapons. They don't have as good of training. And they're smaller, both numerically and physically. They're looking around saying, God, how could we possibly make it? What could we have to overcome our enemy? And the answer is very simple. God. They had God himself. And so if we are going to make it out of the wilderness, it's not just believing in the promise, it is trusting and obeying what is required of us to make it into the land flowing with milk and honey. And up to this point, Israel had been short on both trust and obedience. And for any of us that have wrestled with sin or vice or addiction or anything like that, and I use this word so importantly, we're battling for it. Jesus already has given us the victory. He's already taken the hill. But we still have to contend with sin in our lives. We have to fight against the evil and the urges we have. We have to propel ourselves forward in Christ. God has given us the way out, but many of us remain stuck in the wilderness. And this is one of the main things I want to say, kind of maybe even the most important in the whole series. We all have different wilderness and what that means, and we can unpack that. We all have different ways how we get there. But I think for many people, it's not just our circumstances. A lot of us can be unhappy and quit, right? That's what the Israelites said. Let's just go back to Egypt. But maybe the problem is we're not really longing for anything. Perhaps we're not just stuck in our situations, we're stuck in ourselves. We're lost, not just what's going on out there, but what's going on in here. We're lost in our past. And now God is answering prayer. God is providing opportunity, and we still doubt. God shows himself this mighty way to exit our wilderness. We go, I can't do that. And this is why the wilderness matters so much as a place of testing. It shows me how much I really believe something. When life gets hard, it shows how deep I hold a belief. So let's look at Numbers 14, what happens. So all the congregation raises a loud cry. The people wept that night. And the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, what would we have that we have died in the land of Egypt? What we had died in the wilderness? Why is the Lord bringing us into this land just to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become a prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? And then they said to one another, let us choose a leader to go back to Egypt. They weren't just going to serve another god now. They were going to go back to captivity. They were going to go back. And Moses and Aaron plead before Israel. You've made a covenant with God. Do you think he's going to break it? He will deliver you. And now we see the glory of God appear in a cloud like before. And in verse 11 it says, the Lord said to Moses, how long will this people despise me? How long will they not believe in me? In spite of all the signs and all I've done among them, I will strike them with pestilence and disinherit them, and I'll make you a nation greater and mightier than they. God says, I'm abounding in love, I'm abounding in mercy, slow to anger. That's what Moses reminds him of in the next section. But if they're not going to trust me, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to work. They will die by the sword. They will lose. Because yes, apart from me, they can't make it. So it will be better for me to just judge them now. Moses, I'll start over with you. And Moses reminds God of the covenant. Not because God forgot. There's something being important taught here. The holiness of God is standing, but he shows he will keep his covenants. But he warns them. He says, the Lord said, I have pardoned according to your word, but truly as I live and as all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord, none of the men who have seen my glory and my signs that I did in Egypt in the wilderness, and yet have put me to the test these 10 times, have not obeyed my voice, shall see the land that I swore to give to their fathers. And none of those who despised me shall see it. But my servant Caleb, because he's a different spirit and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land in which we went, and his descendants shall possess it. Now, since the Amalekites and the Canaanites dwell in these valleys, turn tomorrow and set away for the Red Sea. God says, fine, go back. Go back. The only one that's going to see it from this group is Caleb. Why? What does God say? They have despised me. This is willful rebellion. This isn't just stumbling and bumbling. This isn't saying I'm having a hard time trusting because of my circumstance. This is them saying, God, I don't trust you and your character. It would be like this. If I said, hey, look, I can run a 6-minute mile. Me, Dustin Wooten, today. A lot of you would be very skeptical of that statement, right? And look, I don't really think you can do that. Now, there's a time in my life I genuinely could run a 6-minute mile. I ran cross country. I played soccer. There was a day I could do that. But you don't trust what I'm saying because of observation, right? I have good reason to be like, the pastor, hey, you can't do that. It'd been very different if you said, though, hey, look, I have all these reasons why. Or if you were just like, no, I don't believe it. Why? because I don't believe you. Not your circumstance. I don't believe you. I don't believe your character. I don't believe who you are. That's what they've done to God now. 10 times God has handled their doubts, their complaints, their struggles. And he said, I'm done. Because where I'm leading you, faith is required to survive. Faith is required. And if you despise me, you're never going to make it. What ends up happening is they go back to the Red Sea, where they came from. They will spend 40 years going through Paran and Zin. And in Moses' anger, God says even he's not going to make it. He watches them enter from far off. The Israelites don't make it into the land of Israel until Joshua chapter 4. And that promise that God gave them, they never fully realized. They stop going in. They say, we're done trusting. We're done fighting. We're just going to stop here. And that is actually the story of the wilderness for the Israelites. For the next hundreds of years, there will be in conflict because they didn't go where God told them to go. And that's going to be true for you and I. Until we trust and obey, we can theoretically believe all we want. But it's not until life gets hard, until we have to fight our way out of the desert and trust God. It is both and. I'm acting faithfully and trusting the Lord. Will I see the fulfillment of the promise? And this is why next week, we're going to see how Jesus handled his wilderness experience with the devil. Because for many of us, we're not fighting Nephilim, we're not fighting Canaanites and Amorites and Hittites. We're fighting a spiritual battle. And we're seeing this happen in our families and the world around us. So I implore you, if you get nothing else from this series, trust God and fight for your future. So I want to thank you all for being a part of this series and for bearing with me with my voice today. I apologize for that. But if you have any questions, you can email me at staff@newday416, or you can text me, whatever, however we can help. If you want to help us out, you can leave us a Google review. You can give at newday416.church. You can find any next steps, more information, whatever you need there. We love you all. Have a blessed and wonderful week, and we'll see you on Sunday.